need as people of faith, whether Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, pick any faith tradition, we need to spend more time and more energy than ever, redouble our efforts to get to know one another. We do this work not to convert one another. That is absolutely abhorrent to anyone who is serious about interreligious dialogue and reconciliation, but rather we do this work to get a better understanding of one another, to know one another, to learn about each other's traditions, and to both look for the common core that is so often there in religious faiths, but also to understand our differences, to understand that there are differences between our faith communities.
Once we recognize that all life is equally precious and valuable, then the idea of humility, the idea of valuing the life in a humble way rather than being arrogant, that brings about a discourse where we will be able to overcome hatred, overcome conflicts, overcome differences. If we don't basically value the life, then the chances of resolving a conflict just simply doesn't exist, because we have this notion that I am superior to the other.
I spend a lot of time these days speaking about two things. One is that we need the voices of reason and moderation within all of our faith communities to rise up and to reclaim our own faiths.
The Islamic tradition is the moment you begin to belittle or demonize other, you are in fact demonizing or belittling yourself. Because that self of yours, that inner self of yours, that inner being of yours is just as valuable, just as precious as the other you are about to demonize.
I think one of the tragic consequences of the violence between Israelis and Palestinians has been that the average Palestinian and the average Israeli no longer have regular contact. It wasn't that many years ago that Israelis were traveling to Ramallah to eat in Arab restaurants, and people were vice versa. There was a much more of a sense of an everyday interaction, and generally positive interactions. We will never affect peace and tolerance and understanding if we don't find ways for people to get to know one another.
I remember speaking with Hannah Hashrawi, a great Palestinian leader, when she was visiting Los Angeles about this. What would be the role, or did she foresee a role, for religious leaders in helping to bring a similar peaceful solution to the situation in the Holy Land? And she said, absolutely. And I agree with her. I think that religious leaders there should come together and do just as those religious leaders in the Balkans did, said, enough of this, let's resolve these situations.
Take this to a societal level where you are living with people of various faith groups and traditions, or no faith, for example. In that setting, the scripture mandates the believers. There's a concept in the Arabic called lakum dinakum waliya din, which simply means the response of a believer to the other, whether be believer of another perspective, another faith, or of no faith. The answer from the believer is, to me is my faith, and to you is yours.
Narrative is also critical. A couple of years back, I was involved in bringing together Presbyterian and Jewish leaders over the issue of a divestment from companies doing business with Israel. And one of the things we found early on was that our language was so different, our historical narratives of what took place in Israel and Palestine were so different that if we didn't confront that honestly and openly right from the start, we weren't going to make any progress. So I think that is very, very critical.
We started middle of last year a project called Peacemaking from the Abrahamic Faith Groups, from Christian, Jewish, and the Islamic traditions, whereby we all three sit together in a retreat form. And while we recognize the commonalities and the similarities in our faith traditions, we also take those that are troubling texts to us and examine them in the contemporary modern context. How do we interpret them? How do we use them? How do we apply them in our lives today, and to find answers? The hope is at the end of this journey, which is a 2-year project, that we will develop a set of documents that then will be distributed to faith clergy of all 3 Abrahamic faith groups, so that it can serve them as a reference point that yes, there are differences, but those differences must be a reason for us to come together rather than to be away from each other.
I took 42 religious leaders and members of 12 churches and synagogues on a week-long relief mission to Gulfport, Mississippi. We actually rebuilt roofs of homes. These were rabbis, Reformed Conservative Orthodox rabbis, pastors from the AME, African American community, and members of 12 churches and synagogues. And it took, and in addition to having a great time and actually doing 6 roofs, and this from a guy who's never been on the roof of his own home, it took us away from LA for a week, and it was so positive to be together, to do serious labor each day, to study scripture together, to pray a bit together, and to get to know each other together.
Muslims and Catholics came together in the past 5+ years on a national level, sitting together, recognizing that Catholics believe Jesus is the Son of God, and Muslims believe that God neither has any son or partner, nor anyone born to him, and so on. It's one omnipotent God. But yet having a conversation, having a dialogue. Now the Muslims and Catholics are at a point throughout the country by developing sets of documents that are used now by the religious clergy leaders within the Islamic tradition and the clergy leaders within the Catholic tradition to be sensitive to these concepts and yet be able to work together for the common good.
We have, the Archdiocese sponsors formal theological dialogues with a number of different faiths. We have a formal Buddhist Catholic dialogue, Hindu Catholic dialogue, Muslim Catholic dialogue, Jewish Catholic dialogue. For example, we also participate in a number of both ecumenical and interreligious forums where people of divergent faiths come together, sometimes have these great theological discussions, but more often than not, work together for the common good. So I think there's great value for people to come together of these different faiths, cultures, languages. Again, look at Los Angeles. Look at who's here. Everyone's here. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity here to show the world that people of all these divergent faiths and cultures and languages and economic backgrounds and such all can live peacefully together, harmoniously together as one people in the city of the angels.
We are living in a time now when I believe that to be religious is to be interreligious in this century. And I hope and pray that people of faith or people of no faith reject and divorce this notion of exclusivism, whether of Islamic faith, whether of Christian faith, whether of Judaic faith or any other faith. I believe that it is a time and a responsibility on people of all faith groups to truly embrace the other faith in the context of inclusivism and trying to know the other more so that you would know your own self more and better.
Well, miracles happen. Sometimes when all of your skills, you may not think you've achieved anything, or there's been no movement towards resolution of a conflict. I don't think you should ever give up, because as I said, miracles happen. We believe in miracles. There have been instances when people's heart change at the last moment.